This session is with Candice Cranmer and Dr. Cynde Moya on embedding emulation as a service infrastructure, or EaaSi, at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, or ACMI, to access legacy works, or LUE. No, they're not called that. Candice Cranmer is the time-based media conservator at ACMI in Naarm, Melbourne. She's a co-convener of the special interest group Electron at the Australian Institute for the Conservation of Cultural Materials and a board member of the artist-run agency Composite. Having worked in collections, access and preservation for the past 10 years, she has a keen interest in innovative conservation methodologies. She's joined by Dr. Cynde Moya, who directs the Digital Heritage Lab in the Centre for Transformative Media Technologies. The lab is a collection of working vintage computer hardware, software, games, and media art, which sounds like a room I would not like to spend days and days in at all. Dr. Moya also leads the training and development of the software preservation platform Emulation as a Service infrastructure across Australia. Will you please welcome both of them? Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Jim. So my name is Candice Cranmer, and I'm from ACMI, and I'm very honoured to be joined by Dr. Cynde Moya from Swinburne University, and we're both from Melbourne. Cynde and I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this work was done, and that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and also extend that respect to any First Nations people here today. So our presentation aims. The main aim of this presentation is to discuss how ACMI has embedded the Emulation as a Service infrastructure, or EaaSi as we'll refer to it, to make video games, artwork, and software visible on our website for our visitors. This is but one step in an overall preservation and access cycle, so we're also going to share our imaging processes, how we migrate analogue formats to digital, our respective media laboratory setups for this work, and the media that we're using within them, the challenges we're encountering, and we'll also look at the different access modes made possible with EaaSi, including reading room access, digital loans, and display alongside original hardware. But first, why should we care? Australian artists are incredibly innovative. We see evidence of this in the 1980s and 90s, where Melbourne-based artists were pushing both conceptual and technological boundaries in their creative practices. The formats that they were working with, floppy disks, optical disks, video game cartridges, now require content migration to be able to access them, or we risk losing this content and our cultural heritage if we don't look to preserve them right now. Using EaaSi as a preservation tool to open obsolete software environments is allowing us to once again facilitate access to works that artists, researchers, and visitors to our organisations haven't seen in decades. This gives us the opportunity to potentially display single works, whole archives, the historic software that runs them, and as an extension, insight into our social and cultural histories. This is but one example from an artist thrilled to see his work come to life for the first time in years. We've made Dr. Chris Henschke's work available via our website when you're on ACMI's Wi-Fi footprint, and also sent him a unique link to play his work. I first connected with Chris in 2017 when ACMI imaged his optical disc collections, and while he had the imaged or digital version of his work and the instructions to emulate it, being able to send him a direct link years later has meant that this has taken some of the technical heavy lifting from the access equation for him and allowed for an immediate connection with the work. While making work like this available is not new, for instance, Rhizome and the New Museum made Teresa Duncan's CD-ROMs accessible some time ago in their exhibition First Look, New Online. The EaaSi node is the first of its kind in Australia, and Cynde is going to speak more to this, the work that she's doing in the space in Shoalhaven. So the preservation of complex artworks and video games is quite resource intensive, and requires comprehensive technical knowledge and can be difficult without a means to share skills and resources. ACMI has been partnering in the Australian Research Council projects with Flinders, Swinburne and RMIT universities in Australia for over a decade. We see this as a continuum of research practice essential to experimentation in the preservation field. We've worked together to collect and preserve Australian video games created in the 1980s and 90s in the Play It Again 1 and 2 EaaSi grants, and shifted our focus in the Archiving Australian Media Arts EaaSi to preserve optical disc and floppy disk artworks from both ACMI and experimenters' collections. The collaborative work conducted in the EaaSis allows for a framework of experimentation, which gives us a real opportunity to try preservation methods new to us and to share the failings and successes of these trials.
Well, as Candice said in her last slide, we have a new project now, a LEAF, a Linkage, Infrastructure, Equipment and Facilities project entitled The Australian Emulation Network, Accessing Born Digital Cultural Collections. And this project, led by Professor Melanie Swalwell, is building a preservation and access strategy for vintage games, media arts, and other software-dependent files, or complex digital objects, we like to call them. We've brought together a group of GLAM institutions, and we're building a community of practice together to build skills and expertise around particularly preserving and emulating these different complex objects and providing access to them in various ways, like they're doing at ACMI. I came to this project and to Australia about 4 years ago, starting when we were in lockdown. I wasn't able to get here in time. My flight was actually the day that they closed the border. So I worked from my home in Seattle for the first, I think, 8 or 9 months. In conjunction, we did a lot of Zoom meetings. I probably would have been the same if I was sitting in Melbourne, frankly. But before that, I was collection manager and software preservation manager at Living Computers Museum and Labs, which is in Seattle, which is a big collection of working computers, software, hardware, and they did a lot of emulations, so I became familiar with it there. So this picture, I've been going around now that I can travel in Australia, I've been going around to a lot of different sites. First we brought people in to my lab and trained in how to image CD-ROMs and floppy disks. And then I went out to a lot of different sites and looked at their labs. There were some significant labs there. The University of Western Australia has some nice work, and University of South Australia has some serious equipment too they're working on, and of course the State Library of New South Wales is really far ahead in their disk imaging and stuff. So a lot of people had labs and equipment, so, but they needed training on how to use it. There's still it's like they had budget to buy this equipment, and now they needed to hire people to tend to it. So at any rate, we're building skills and capabilities and community around making disk images, and then using those disk images in emulation as a service infrastructure, or EaaSi. Through emulation, we are reanimating complex digital objects and making them available once again for research and fun. So play, right? So these games, media art, software, and files that this project are working on are typically trapped on carriers like floppy disks, zip disks, SyQuest disks, CD-ROMs, and so on. And imaging these disks is not a straightforward or simple process. It requires a lot of equipment to digitize the vintage carriers, even before we can get them into emulation. So most of the sites I've visited have or are building their own sets of disk imaging tools, some as simple as just a CD-ROM, a USB CD-ROM, or complicated like a FRED, a forensic desktop, or there's a lot of equipment out there that you can have. Let's have the next slide. This is the Digital Heritage Lab at Swinburne University, which is like a little, used to be a projection room for a theater, lecture theater, and now it's this kind of this small and active space of churning stuff. And I've put together a lot of stations to image different sorts of media. Now, I inherited this lab and equipment from Dr. Denise de Vries, who was a collaborator of Melanie Swalwell's for many years and needed to step down for health reasons. So I got this lab, which was a very useful collection of vintage hardware and some software. So unlike many of the other institutions I've visited, I don't really have to buy much stuff, right? I've got a lot of stuff, you know, disk drives and cables and things. So I have just been able to hack together these different stations. So, you know, there's a bit curator workstation with a zip drive attached to it. I can also attach a hard drive via a forensic bridge to bit curator, which is really cool. That's a Macintosh OS 9.2.2 with a SCSI SciQuest drive. SciQuest disks are a real pain in the neck because there's 5 or 6 different kinds, and you have to have a different kind of drive for each one of them. So that's the 44 megabyte drive, which then I can put it onto, you know, copy it onto the old hard drive there, and then extract it. There's a USB on the back, so I can put a USB and take it out. And actually, you know what I had to do? The USB wouldn't work because it was an old style of a file. So I had to write it to a zip disk and then image the zip disk and use that in the emulator. So that was fun. There's a CryoFlux driving a 5 1/4 and a 3 1/2 inch drive. There on the right, which is Windows 7, just happens to be. Applesauce is another floppy disk controller that controls the older Apple disk drives and works really well for also other 5 1/4 and 3 1/2 inch disks. Very nice tool. Also just a USB, CD, DVD drive with conventional freeware software called ImageBurn. Sometimes we also use alcohol 120% for disk imaging the CD-ROMs. And then that's just kind of a picture of the lab corner where I sit where I'm surrounded by all of that stuff. So many of these vintage drives and computers are still more or less affordably available on eBay. So if you're looking to build a lab of your own, that's probably what I'd recommend. Or also build relationships with your local computer hobbyist community. I know that there's at least one here in New Zealand that's pretty active. And there's a lot of expertise and equipment still resides amongst these hobbyists.
And this is ACMI's Blackmagic Design Media Preservation Lab. This lab sits in the heart of the museum. And it was a part of ACMI's renewal project, opened in 2020. We see it as a space to invite artists, creators, industry and preservation specialists to come and share their ideas. And we're also conducting time-based media conservation, digital preservation, research, and of course format migration using equipment such as what Cynde's already discussed. We also have a RIP Station 7000, which is our robot, what we call our robot, our disk ripping robot, which is to the bottom left. This potentially allows us to image 400 disks consecutively. And then to the right of that is the CryoFlux, which is floppy disks as well as Cynde has. So imaging challenges. The condition of original carriers that may have been stored in less than ideal conditions in the past, we could encounter scratches or delamination causing damaged sectors. And so that's the diagram you see here. We've run an imaged optical disc through DV disaster, and the red section shows damage to the sectors at in the optical disc, which may mean that we could read it, or we may not be able to, and we may not be able to salvage those damaged sectors.
So the advantages of emulation and EaaSi Emulation is a software solution which uses a contemporary computer to mimic the performance of older computers and operating systems. So emulation as a service infrastructure, or EaaSi, is a resource sharing platform. It enables the distribution and retrieval of emulation environments between users in the network. Members of the Australian EaaSi node have access to a shared pool of environments in which to render or play the digitally imaged games, media arts, and software that are part of our project. So the EaaSi project is really about access, providing access to these once dead materials for you, your researchers, your patrons, and your visitors. I want to note also that we're recruiting for a second round of grant funds to bring on more institutions to the EaaSi community of practice. So let me know if you're interested in it and in this, and we're doing a informational presentation and demo on December 8th about this. So these are shared resources and environments. Setting up an emulator can be really complicated and requires that you have admin access to your computer, then setting it up and then using it, having to find the operating system media, and it can take a really long time to do that. I mean, it's doable, but this emulation as a service, it jumps over a lot of that configuring the operating system or the environments, and researchers, users, archivists can then just pick, Mac OS 9 and put the image, the CD-ROM image into that, and just skip over all of this creating of the environments, and so it changes the type of expertise that you need in your organization. So it becomes, instead of trying to make an emulator run, it becomes remembering how to use Windows 98. So, okay.
Emulation steps. Okay. So this is an example of what partners will see when they access the EaaSi interface. So all participants have access to this. In this demonstration, we're taking an image, what is an ISO of an optical disc, and adding that to EaaSi. We're then looking for the appropriate environment to play this ISO in, and any software dependencies that we need to run it as well. So this is the sort of work that Cynde's been doing in the background to put that operating system and dependencies together so everyone in the node can access these environments. Once you've found the right environment, in this case we're using Mac OS 9 with a version of Macromedia and Shockwave to play Tatiana Penter's work Strange Cities, created in 2000. Then you can run the image in the environment. When you save an instance of this environment with the work running, EaaSi creates a unique identifier, which we then store in our collection management system. So here we're sort of looking at the work and pairing it with the environment. And then you can run it through the emulator and see the original beautiful environment of Mac OS 9. And there is the image disk there that we now have access to. And access to that work from 2000. Including README files and anything that the artist included with their work. Okay. Emulation challenges. There are many.
There are actually many challenges. It's certainly not a perfect solution yet. First of all, you need to have the software to install it into the operating system to render certain files. And sometimes you can't tell, sometimes you can. There's tools out there that you can use to characterize the files. So, is it a doc file? Is it an AutoCAD file? Is it but sometimes you just have to put it in the emulator, and then it will puke up an error message and saying that it's looking for this or that kind of software. So that one of the things that we're doing in our project is in conjunction with the Australian Computer Museum Society. They have loaned us their extensive collection of boxed software, and we're imaging this software and then building individual environments with some of this important software things like Adobe InDesign and PageMaker and Harvard Graphics and who knows what type of software that people in the future are going to need to render their files. So we're seeding the EaaSi network with what's going to turn out to be several thousand environments that will be shareable across Australia with our copyright laws. And we're mimicking what they did in the US node, where they had a bunch of software available to them and they built the environments, but we couldn't get can't share the US resources because of the copyright laws. So we have to redo the whole thing here in Australia. And so instead of waiting for the laws to change, we just got on it and are building the environments ourselves. So, but that is certainly a problem right there. But once you become a member of the node, you will have access to all of these environments. Sometimes software, if it's really expensive stuff like AutoCAD or SolidWorks or things, it wants to phone home to a server to verify itself. And those servers aren't maintained anymore. So you have to find ways to work around the verification process, like by hacking into the registry somehow. Graphic cards aren't emulated very well right now, so that prevents us from emulating certain types of complex games like driving games or things that are really heavy in graphics. The sound, we're still trying to solve problems of sound, which sometimes there's pops, noise, dropouts, lag in the sound, and so we're, this is definitely a research project that we're trying to solve the problems with, And, colors, sometimes the artists say, oh, these colors are wrong, or this font is funny, or so when you really get down to it, into the weeds, there's still a lot to do. But our team, our community of practice is working really hard on different aspects, and so we're making a lot of progress.
Yeah, and I think it's things like colour and sound that artists do tend to speak to in terms of measuring authenticity. So we work really closely with artists to see where that line is for their works before we try and make them publicly available. And that feeds into the next slide. So embedding EaaSi into ACMI's website. Once you've worked through some of these challenges, and that direct relationship with the artist really helps, we look at different ways of making the work accessible. One of these methods is through our website. Embedding EaaSi is essentially a two-step process which activates a system of automation. So our collection management system speaks to our museum operating system, which points back to the configured emulation environment, so that EaaSi, that unique EaaSi ID. In practical terms, what this looked like, or what we needed, was an ease server and the ease script to initiate this process. So we needed the URL of the ease server, which in our case is facilitated by the infrastructure partners to the LEAF project, and that's AARNet in Australia, who are hosting the ease servers for the Australian node. And of course, we needed the URL of the JavaScript to load the emulator, which is made accessible by EaaSi on their official ease client GitLab repository, which is usable when you're in the node and have access to EaaSi. And this image is from our creative technologist, Simon Loeffler, who has embedded ease code into one of our website templates for use. So the second step requires data permissions management for the mapped information to flow through to our museum operating system. So for this process, we add that unique ID, that EaaSi environment ID, to the designated platform field in our CMS, which also allows us to record the history of the ways that we've made use of that platform and other platforms for access. This information is mapped and automatically flows through to our museum operating system, or XOS, which then speaks to our website. We can then configure the level of access we'd like to give to the work. So ACMI has a few levels of access, and that is open access, so that's on all of our platforms available to everybody, access on site, or access with restrictions. As this is still a research project, these titles are still only accessible via our Wi-Fi footprint for now, but we hope to make many more works available in the future. And again, because we're working closely with artists, this is a slow process of sort of, again, seeing where that line of authenticity rests. So in this, right now, we're looking at permissions in the website. But I'll come back to these, I think. Yeah. Okay, so when on-site, visitors can access an online exhibition of emulation works as a part of the Archiving Australia Media Arts project. When they're not on site, you can still have access to all the descriptive data and added information about the work also embedded in the collection page. As we talk to more and more artists to gauge their reception to emulation, we hope to make more works available and interactive for people when they're on site. So again, this is Strange Cities by Tatiana Pentes from 2000, as you would see it in our website. And there's the work there. I should say it's without sound just for this presentation, but sound is really integral to the work. We've also done a similar process for video games. So you can now access over 40 Australian video games when you're on site at ACMI, and you can play them through our website and interact with them. So these are games from the 97, popular cricket sports games. And then there's also, as a part of the Play It Again 1 and 2 projects, there's lots of interviews and extra information about the creators, largely Beam software.
So this is a diagram I drew early in the project and shared it with our community of practice, how I imagined reading room access to emulated environments would work. So you've got EaaSi in the cloud, we've got the environments configured, somehow there's links on a web page in a computer that can access the internet, or probably limited to just that one EaaSi in the cloud. Maybe you have a manual, some information, some instructions, either next to it or on the computer. The links link out to the emulated item in the browser. And sure enough, we made this happen. So that was really a pretty amazing development with using the work of Simon Loeffler particularly, and the other resources that EaaSi had. And suddenly we're able to provide access in Windows. So like that. So can I have the next slide? For example, I was working with the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and they want to have a computer in their reading room that's connected to EaaSi that will show a bunch of artworks. So I was looking at two different methods of doing it. One was installing all of the artworks in one environment, and then the user, researcher, whatever, comes and encounters this page like this with the different folders that have the different artworks. Now this means all the artworks have to be on the same platform, in this case Mac OS 9. So it also may lead to user confusion because especially exiting one program and starting another one, which can take a long time, and you have this puzzle of like, how do I get out of these things? And at least some of the artworks make it difficult for you to exit. So that can be a problem. So also the folders on the desktop is not particularly elegant, and so I was looking at like writing a vintage web page, coding a little HTML page that would open up in the emulation window and then link to the artworks and have some information about them and how to start them and how to get out. So which would be pretty cool. And I did just get some web authoring software for Mac OS 9 from my Australia Computer Museum Society collection. So, but it turns out, we'll take the next slide, that the other strategy is to have a web page like this with links that go to individual environments. So each of those links would open up a emulation window that you could, the user could play with all they want and get out of it and go back to the directory web page to look again. One interesting thing about the emulation window is that the user can do whatever they want, right? They can wreck the operating system, they can change things around, and when they exit, it goes back to the 0 state, so it's undamaged. So undamageable for the, like that. So, the preferred strategy looks like it's going to be links like that would have, some more information around them, like Candice catalog. In this case, it is simpler for the user to move from one artwork to another. They just click back, the emulation stops, and then they can choose another one. And like the ACMI catalog, you could surround it with descriptive information. And we're also, another one of our community of practice, Simon Biggs and Alex DeGarris-Boots. Simon is a artist who used Macromedia Director a lot during his career. So, and they were, what he's really looking to do is make a kind of historical collection of his and his friends' artworks that are available on his website that he can also write stuff about and create it and make them available for researchers now and bring it back to life. And he's really delighted with this Simon Loeffler strategy, and they jumped right aboard on this and are really looking forward to us getting more bandwidth on the tool so they can make it publicly available.
And we're also looking at modes for digital loans via emulation. Recently, we did a digital loan with RMIT Gallery for Radical Utopia, an exhibition that they held about design in Melbourne in the 80s. There was a whole room dedicated to game design. So we had a game at ACMI called Mugsy's Revenge that we imaged from cassette, made tap files, and uploaded those to EaaSi, to the EaaSi environment. And because it's browser-based, we can, Simon has made a freestanding website that we can give the link to RMIT. RMIT can play that link in their gallery, and there's no need for them to set up any emulation service themselves. They can just play the game through this link. So they no longer have to, we don't have to loan the file to them, they don't have to run the file, so it's a pretty neat solution. Simon has also made this code available. So for anyone using the EaaSi environment, you can go to the GitHub lab, ACMI's labs post, and download the EaaSi code yourself. And then you, again, pair that unique ID with this HTML index. So you can just have one game playing by itself.
We've also used EaaSi in several side-by-side, we call them side-by-side events, where you have the game or media art running on the original hardware, and next to it having it running in emulation, so that visitors, users could just come and experiment and see what the difference is. And so that these side-by-side events have been a real wonderful way of showcasing both the games and the technology. So we didn't have a lot of these outcomes written into the project. Some of them really arose organically from working together and discussing the possibilities in our community of practice meetings, which has just been really wonderful to see how people have taken to it, and these different, mostly library and archivists, digital preservationists have picked or exploring the tool and doing neat things with it. So I love seeing the variety of things that people are coming up with. And this is a really big project that requires a lot of different kinds of expertise, from imaging the discs, which is its whole thing, that it requires a lot of equipment and understanding, and the people who know how to do it, they've like fallen into the hole and you can't understand what they're saying. And it's true. It's like you desperately try to understand about the sectors and and from disk imaging to the emulations to actually using the software to the web dev people that ACMI and other institutions are doing. So it's a really big project, and it requires a lot of these different disciplines working together to get it to go. And so it's really wonderful getting everybody together and seeing what kind of exciting things they can make. So.
We hope you have lots of questions, because this is what we have.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. Shall we I'll give that to you. We'll take a seat and have a chat. Once again, we're doing a Q&A through Slido. So you head to slido.com and use the code NDF23. I think there have already been some questions coming through, but we always love more. First question coming in: how do you preserve games and software that are dependent on a live internet connection or proprietary servers or entirely online? A very simple question. I think the straightforward answer.
Yeah, super simple. Do you want to speak maybe about the next part of the project that might tackle this?
What part is that?
So I think the next part of the EaaSi project might look to net games and how they have sort of connected with optical discs or floppy disks and interconnected parts.
I know that one of the next parts of the project will have, you'll be able to network computers, so have a virtual LAN party. Right now we're working with games from the 80s and 90s, and these questions that are coming up with the more contemporary games are to be determined, really. I mean, that is yet another big problem that we haven't solved yet. We haven't even approached it yet. There are software preservationists and hobbyists out there who are doing things like recreating the server so that it has something to bounce up against again. But we'll just have to see. This is a smaller project like that, where we're not doing online stuff.
If we're emulating LAN parties, I hope people will have to take their CRT monitor, like in a shopping cart, down to their friend's house to be able to run that.
I
Yeah.
think too, this question is to contemporary sort of collect, like video game collecting and even VR sort of preservation.
Can I get you to use that mic? Sorry, Candice. I think there's an issue.
Sorry, I think this question too is to contemporary sort of art and video game and collecting. Proprietary software and things like VR is really complicated, and artworks that link out live to the internet are also really complicated. And I think the proprietary nature of software is going to be particularly complicated for VR, sort of headsets that you need that are interlinked to the software that are then proprietary based. But then because the technology is changing so rapidly, it's quite hard to manage all of this software. So there's some great papers being written by the Tate on VR preservation as a sort of knowledge base and best practice or good practice. But it's complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I anticipate that there's a big difference if you are acquiring a software or a game in collaboration with the people who are making it versus taking something that was just sort of sourced from 10, 15, 20 years ago and you're trying to figure out how on earth this thing ran.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I guess contemporary video game collecting, what you'd like to collect is the source code. But it's so intertwined with proprietary software again that's really difficult. So how we're going to be able to access some of those things in the future will be problematic if we can't collect that source code and be able to read through that.
Totally. Related to that, are there what sort of copyright considerations are there, both for the works that you're trying to emulate and the softwares that you're using to emulate them?
There is an exemption in the Australian Copyright Code, and we got a legal opinion about it that basically says we can share software across the network for use in reading rooms of the GLAM institutions. So we can't let this stuff go wild on the web, but we can. It can be used in reading rooms right now. We're working on getting another exemption that would be a virtual reading room, such that you could log into somebody's website from your home and use it that way. But we don't have that exemption, so it has to be in the physical reading room of the institution. But we can make a copy, if we have the physical copy, if one person in the network has the physical copy with the license key, we can share it across the whole Australian network.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Speaking of going wild on the web, is there any collaboration possibility or in the works with the Internet Archive and their suite of emulators?
We haven't been collaborating with them, but I use their resources all the time. But they have a different model, right? They're using DOSBox and some other emulators, MAME, the multi-arcade something, emulator, and then they'll spin up the stuff live in the browser. They're they have a big risk appetite, so they make their stuff available that way. So it's available to the world versus emulation as a service infrastructure, which is a contained thing, right? So it's a closed ecosystem.
Sorry, Candice.
If they want to collaborate, we're open to that. If anyone's here from the Internet Archive.
Yeah.
Speaking of risk, what sort of security considerations do you have of people being able to access these emulations online?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess that's why we presented a lot of different access models. So ACMI is presenting works online, but again, we're working really closely with artists to see what their appetite for having things online is. So again, those levels of access allow us to have things only accessible on site or through the website, depending on how artists feel about emulation and or some of the issues that may come up with that as well. So that's sort of one way that we're dealing with sort of security. And so when you're on site, it's only through our Wi-Fi access that you can access these works. So that's one way we're dealing with that.
And I'm not 100% confident about this, but it seems that if there was a virus on one of the CDs or floppy disks, it would be contained in the emulator. It wouldn't escape. But until someone very clever figures out a way to make it escape. But yeah.
Another question: with so much, there is so much work in preserving a game, getting it emulated, building a stable environment. What is the curation process for picking which games to focus on when there are so many out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess it's a bit of a matrix. We look at significance when we're looking at works to display. A mix of contemporary and legacy works go on display at ACMI. Yeah, I think it depends on our programming, what's sort of coming up. But I guess in terms of some of the projects that we've worked on the EaaSis, there's been a group of people sort of looking at the significance of the works and what they've meant to Melbourne and Australia and the video game sort of social memory history that we've also been collecting. So, yeah, matrix.
Yeah, Helen Stuckey and Melanie Swalwell chose a lot of the games, and they, for their significance to Australia, made in Australia, or had some kind of touch to Australian programmers and game designer companies.
Yeah, I think because Australian video game has been sort of underrepresented in our collection, so it was a real push in those Play It Again projects, which sort of started in '95, to really collect, Australian video game creation, and then display that ACMI and other institutions.
Fantastic. I wanted to pick up on the possibility of emulation. With what room is that? The emulation allows you to adapt the thing that you are representing as well. So you can pick up for example, a Pokemon game and play it through at twice the speed because the walking animation cycles are very slow. What capacity is there hypothetically from personal experience? I lost a whole... Anyway, what sort of plasticity is there in emulation in EaaSi to be able to adapt the games as they go?
One thing that Simon Biggs is doing with his old Macromedia director media arts things is he can go back and edit the code that he used and change the timing, put new things into it, and then save it. So he can make and modify his old work and then save. So that's certainly something that you can do.
But that's on the end of the creator. Sort of, you need to adjust the work itself, and then. But sort of from a viewer's point of view, are there options to be able to change the work? Because I'm also thinking about, especially old video games, as something was sort of shown on a CRT monitor, it appears very differently than it appears on a contemporary monitor. And so having options to toggle whether it looks like a CRT or looks like a contemporary screen, or being able to adjust the speed, is there any plasticity for that, or am I just sort of talking about the most impossible things?
I don't think it's impossible. And as a part of the research sort of project, maybe it's something that we could look to. I guess we're doing a lot of the experimentation behind the scenes to present the most authentic version of the work that we can. But if you're seeing things on our website at ACMI, then clearly you can use your own device to do that. So it is going to be a different experience if you've got your mobile, your laptop, or whatever you've got with you to view that work. But I think that would be interesting. I think what Cynde was doing with the side-by-side presentations was looking at the original hardware and running the game, and then the emulated version, so you can see some of that difference, which was really interesting. And you've set that up twice now, so once at ACMI and once at Swinburne. So that was a really interesting experiment. Yeah.
There's another group in the US that are working on citation of games at a particular point. So you could be reading a paper about a game, and then they'll say, oh, and then at this point, Mario jumps and does this, and you can do this other thing. And you can fire up the emulator at that point in the game and then start playing through from there. And then also save the states and do it again, play through, record it. So they're doing some really interesting stuff with digital citation of games.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
It also reminds me of the game Portal, where the developers did a commentary for the game. So maybe you can go back and get the creators to do a commentary on bits of the game.
But I mean, we sort of have done some of that. We've, for the Play It Again projects, we've had the original creators come into the lab and comment. So we've run the work through emulation, and we've recorded them playing the game and talking through some of the technicalities. Two makers we came in had to play their own game because it's so complex that nobody else could play it. So it was really great to have them in the space, and now that's a record in our records forever, to speak to that sort of creation and gameplay. And then, so you also have those instructions on how to play.
That's so cool. This is the sort of thing that I nerd out on, and there's a comment there from someone else saying that seeing a lot of the old operating systems and app icons and just the word Netscape evokes a whole different set of feelings that haven't unlocked in a long while. Another question coming through: what advice do you have for any organisations that are looking to get into imaging and making content available through emulation, but they don't necessarily know where to start?
Well, we're going to be having that informational meeting on December 8th, and I'd recommend just asking me, get my card, come to that meeting, see if you want to join into the project. You can also look at eaaSi.info is the website, and there's some good information there about how the project is moving along and the map, the timeline of what their technology doing and going to deliver. So. Definitely take a look at the website, or I'll get my card and I'll get you to the meeting on December 8th. We do have The National Archives of New Zealand is an observer on the project, and we'll probably get a couple more New Zealand institutions.
Cynde, you're also running a workshop on imaging next week or the week after for the Born Digital Heritage Conference
we have a
held in
conference
Melbourne
too.
at ACMI. So you'll be in ACMI's lab imaging away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a conference next week called Born Digital Cultural Heritage, which will be 2 days, and you can join online or come in person.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. I think that's all we have time for. Everybody, will you please join me in thanking Candice and Cynde?